Back-to-back wins against the Premier League's top two for Carrick's United, as the signs of improvement both on and off the ball continued for the Red Devils. But what exactly was United's tactical approach, and how did they limit the Gunners offensively? Let's take a look, beginning with United when they were on the ball. When the Red Devils were building from deep, Arsenal were looking to be uber aggressive in the press, as that 4-3-3 on paper quickly morphed into something like a 4-3-1-2, with Odegaard alongside Jesus ready to close down the centre-backs. And crucially, initially, United would stagger their midfield in the build-up, with Casemiro as a solitary pivot. But this would make it far too easy for Declan Rice to tie him up. Naturally, Mainu became the secondary outlet option, dropping deep alongside his fellow midfielder. But Arsenal were hesitant to also commit Zubimendi to the press, as this would leave an absolute chasm in the midfield. So, instead, Arteta entrusted the athleticism and the game reading of Declan Rice to cover both men and anticipate which pivot United would look to hit. And early on, United were much more likely to go long in these situations, but as they settled into the game, we saw Lahrmans much more willing to take the riskier short pass, which could see United break the first line of pressure. And in open play, there were a lot of similarities in the Arsenal defensive shape, though it was much more of a standard 4-4-2. But the key once again is that the Gunners were willing to take their opportunities to press, particularly if United were being forced to play backwards, with Odegaard and Jesus looking to hop onto the centre-backs in these 2v2 situations. Perhaps to help them deal with this man-to-man pressure, Luke Shaw would start deeper initially, hopefully creating an easy outlet option due to the 3 versus 2. However, it was simple enough for Saka to join the press and make it 3v3. And all of this was backed up by Zubimendi and Rice, immediately applying pressure on Casemiro and Mainu, making it as difficult as possible for United to progress out of their own third. The risk for the Gunners, of course, was Fernandes potentially drifting between the lines and getting on the ball if one of the deeper men was able to progress it into these positions. But this rarely happened, initially because again, one of the keys to Arteta's defensive system is the amount of trust he places in each one of his defenders. So Saliba was expected to be man-oriented on Fernandes, so that United weren't 3 versus 2 up in the midfield anymore. And that trust extended to Saliba's defensive partner, because Mbeumo was as mobile as ever, willing to run in behind, but also drop deeper into that midfield space. And Gabriel had to stay just as touch-tight, so that often both centre-backs were also man-to-man. But this is where we saw a key tweak from United, with Diogo Dalot being much more aggressive down the right-hand side, pushing up early to provide the width, and this now freed up Ahmad to move in field. So where before the man-to-man situation was manageable, now there was the danger of the third man being found between the lines, if Trossard did not track his man. However, all of this was only a threat when Arsenal was still high up in the press, but the Gunners were often able to make the right decision, going from that aggressive 4-4-2 with the forwards on the centre-backs to a more conservative 4-4-2, which would allow the pivots to protect that space between the lines a lot more. But the freedom for the United fullbacks extended to the left-hand side as well, and while Shaw may not have been as aggressive as Dalot with his starting position, he could still push up the pitch, and with Saliba's attention potentially on Fernandes between the lines, it could create gaps for Dorgu to potentially run into, and as the match went on, he got more and more aggressive with his runs. And we see some shades of this in Dorgu's goal, with Saliba and Gabriel's attention fixed on the men between the lines, and Shaw now allowing Dorgu to move infield. But rather than make the run in behind, this time he's the extra midfield man, and Dorgu uses this temporary room to receive and combine with Fernandes before the stunning finish. But let's also take a look at what both sides were doing when Arsenal were in possession, as they did have more of the ball. United were also defending in a 4-4-2 for most of the match, but they were much more conservative, with the forwards primarily sitting on the pivots rather than looking to press the centre-backs, because on the occasions where they did press, with Arsenal willing to commit a lot more men between the lines, if they didn't get this exactly right, they were at a massive risk of the press being broken. and Arsenal were committed to building out with the back three, but who they used to create the back three gave them different advantages. Nketiah was the more aggressive fullback, but that could create room outside of United's narrow front two, allowing Declan Rice to receive in these positions and drive up into the final third to try and create. But because the first blocks of United's were so narrow, it was the wide regions that provided the most opportunity, and Arsenal could look to create similar advantages down the right-hand side, with Saka pinning Shaw deep, high up the pitch, while these three men could look to drift to the right and rotate to cause United issues. And this could have success, particularly if Patrick Dorgu was drawn higher up trying to press out wide. As if Arsenal were able to get a second man high up the pitch, either a midfielder, a forward, or especially when Ben White came on, an advancing fullback in the half space, there was the potential for a 2 versus 1 against Shaw. And in fact, for the most part, Arsenal were able to manufacture 1v1 situations easily enough for their wingers from these positions, but the wide men just weren't able to make the most of these. But the centre threatened to provide the breakthrough for Arsenal. But that was especially the case when it was Zubimendi who was dropping in to be the third man. Where previously, Casemiro and Mainu were more comfortable in this setup, Zubimendi as the conductor getting on the ball, paired with Rice in the midfield, tended to attract one of the midfielders higher up the pitch, leaving the other more isolated, and creating room in these positions for Arsenal to potentially find a man in a position to turn. But once again, despite the potential for that, a combination of the lack of execution and United being much more aggressive in closing down the men in these positions meant that Arsenal were rarely able to turn and create high-quality opportunities, in open play at least. Overall, it was a match that threatened to go either way, but the signs of rapid improvement from the Red Devils are undeniable. But what did you make of the match? As always, I can't cover everything that happened in the match, so I'd love to read what you made of it down in the comments below. And if you don't want to just watch tactical analysis videos, but want to be able to start analyzing yourself, sign up for my free program, Football Fundamentals, through the link down below. Over the course of 1 month, I'll teach you the beginner steps of analysis, absolutely free. And if you enjoyed this as a United fan, take a look at this one, examining the tactics of every post-Ferguson United manager. Trust me, you'll love it.